My name is Dorothea Ann Bell, and these words, well, they might be the last piece of me this world ever gets to hold. I'm 84 years old now, and the Mississippi sun has carved more lines on my face than a mapmaker could trace on a dusty road. People round here in Oak Haven, they see an old woman who keeps to herself, a relic from a time they'd rather forget. They see the weathered wood of my porch, the overgrown wisteria vines trying to swallow the house whole, and they think they know my story. They think it's one of quiet solitude, maybe a little bit of country craziness. But they don't know the weight of the name I carry. They don't know what happened to the other Bell sisters. This town, it has a heartbeat, you know. You can hear it in the mornings, that low hum of folks starting their day, the smell of chicory coffee drifting out from the diner on Main Street. On Sundays, the sound of the Baptist church bells rolls over the hills and settles in your bones, a heavy, holy blanket. It's a town built on sweet tea and sweeter smiles, but beneath all that, there's a current of judgment that runs deeper than the Pearl River. Folks here remember my father, Reverend Elijah Bell, as a pillar of this community, a man of God. His statue, cold and stone, still stands in the town square, looking down on us all. But a statue don't tell you what a man does when the church doors are closed. It don't tell you about the secrets that can fester in a house, hidden by the scent of magnolias and the drone of cicadas on a long, hot afternoon. I was the middle sister, you see. There was Hester, the oldest, with eyes that held a storm even on the calmest days. And then there was little Miriam, delicate as a bird's wing. We grew up on a farm a few miles out, a place so tucked away that you could scream, and the only thing that'd hear you was the cotton growing in the fields. It was just us three, a trinity of girls learning to be silent together. Our mother, she was a whisper in the house, a shadow that prayed harder the louder the house got. We were taught that family was sacred, that blood was the thickest bond there was. But they never tell you that blood can also be the chain that holds you down. I've held this story in my chest for so long, it feels like it's grown roots around my heart. A story about three sisters who shared more than just a last name. We shared a secret that was born in the dark, a truth so heavy it broke one of us and silenced the other forever. People wonder why none of the Bell girls ever married, why we never had families of our own. The truth is, we did. We just didn't get to choose the father. If you like the start of this story, like, share, and subscribe to find out what I've been hiding for so long. To understand the darkness that took root in our home, you have to understand my father, the Reverend Elijah Bell. He was two men, you see, stitched into one body. On Sunday mornings, he was the man who stood in the pulpit, his voice a rolling thunder that could make the most stubborn sinner feel the fear of God. He'd speak of grace and redemption, his arms outstretched as if he could personally lift the whole congregation up to heaven. His hands, which looked so gentle holding that heavy, leather-bound Bible, were the same hands the townsfolk would shake, feeling blessed by his touch. They saw a shepherd, a righteous man. But a shepherd, child, he owns his flock. He does with them as he pleases. And when the sun went down and the world outside our farm fell away, the other man would come out. That man's gospel was one of silence, and his church was the four walls of our little house where no one else could hear the sermon. It started with Hester. She was the oldest and the first to blossom. She'd just turned 13, and her body was changing in all the ways a girl's does, a map of womanhood starting to show. I remember seeing him watch her. It wasn't the way a father should look at his daughter. It was a hungry look, a look that assessed and claimed ownership. The air in the house grew thick, heavy, like the moments before a summer storm breaks. My sister, who used to run through the cotton fields with her hair flying wild, started making herself small. She'd hunch her shoulders, keep her eyes fixed on the floorboards, as if she could will herself to disappear right into them. Me and Miriam, we felt it too. It was a cold dread that seeped through the cracks in the walls, a fear with no name. We just knew, in the way that animals know when a predator is near, that something was wrong. Our mother, she must have seen it. She must have, but she turned her face to the wall and her prayers to the ceiling. I'd hear her at night, a frantic whisper from her room, begging for deliverance, for strength, but she never begged for him to stop. It was like she thought if she prayed hard enough, God would fix the devil sitting at her own dinner table. A man can use scripture to save a soul, or to cage one. My father, he was a master locksmith. He'd twist the holy words until they became justifications. He spoke of purity and sacrifice, of a father's duty to keep his daughters from the sins of the world. He said the world outside was a wicked place, full of boys who would defile them. He would be their keeper, their protector. He would keep us pure by taking that purity for himself. The first time he went to Hester's room, the whole house held its breath. Me and Miriam, we were in our room, huddled under the quilt, our hands clamped over each other's mouths to stifle the sound of our own terror. We didn't hear a scream. That was the worst part. Hester knew better than to scream. All we heard was the slow, deliberate creak of the floorboards, and then a silence that was louder than any cry. The next morning, Hester came to breakfast with hollows under her eyes, so deep they looked like bruises. She didn't speak a word. She just moved like a ghost, her soul already starting to float away from her body. Then came the sickness. That's what our mother called it when Hester's belly began to swell. A woman's affliction, a punishment from God because she'd looked too long at a boy who worked the market. I knew it was a lie. We all knew. But in our house, the truth was a poison you learned not to swallow. Hester's growing shame was hidden under baggy dresses and oversized aprons. She was a child herself, carrying a monster's secret. The birth was a nightmare whispered in the dead of night. He wouldn't allow a doctor. God's will is the only medicine this house needs, he declared. It was just me and my mother, with a basin of water and old rags, while Hester bit down on a leather strap to keep from making a sound. The baby came, a little boy with a tuft of dark hair, and for a single moment, there was this sacred quiet. A new life, but that life wasn't a blessing in my father's eyes. It was evidence. He took one look at that tiny, wrinkled face, and his own face turned to stone. He wrapped the crying babe in a burlap sack, saying it was an abomination, a sin made flesh that had to be cleansed. My mother wept, begging him, but her pleas were no match for his righteousness. He said he was taking the child to a place where God could deal with it directly. He walked out into the dark, toward the swamps that bordered our land. When he came back hours later, the burlap sack was empty and there were mud stains on his boots. He never spoke of the child again. He just told Hester that her sin had been washed away, that she was clean now. But I saw the look in his eyes. He hadn't washed away a sin. He had buried a secret. And we all knew, in the suffocating silence of that farmhouse, that the ground he'd buried it in was hungry for more. We thought the storm had passed after it broke Hester. We were wrong. After a time, when the seasons changed and the memory was supposed to fade, I saw him start to watch me in that same way. It was my turn. After he buried Hester's secret in the swamp, a new kind of quiet settled in our house. It wasn't peace. It was the stillness of a battlefield after the fight is over, with one soldier left broken and the rest of us just waiting for the next assault. Hester was still there, of course, her body moving through the rooms, doing her chores, but her soul had gone somewhere else, somewhere far away where he couldn't reach it. I'd catch her staring out the window for hours, her hands still in a bowl of soapy water, and I knew she wasn't seeing the cotton fields. She was seeing a ghost, her own. And then, the eye of the storm that was my father turned on me. It was a slow turn, deliberate. A farmer inspecting his next crop, the way he'd look at me across the dinner table, the way his hand would linger on my shoulder for a moment too long when he passed by. It was a language I had learned from watching Hester, and my blood ran cold with the knowing of what was coming. The first time he came for me, it was a humid night in late summer, the air so thick with the smell of jasmine and decay, it was hard to breathe. The moon was a sliver in the sky, offering no comfort, no light to see by. I had prayed for it not to happen. I'd prayed to a God that seemed to only listen to my father's voice. I laid in my bed, stiff as a board, listening to the sounds of the house settling. But then I heard it, the one sound I was dreading, the soft, familiar creak of the third step on the staircase. His footstep. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. When the door to the room I shared with Miriam opened, she didn't stir. She was so young, sleep in the deep, innocent sleep of a child who didn't yet know the monsters were already inside the house. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, a great dark shape against the faint light from the hallway. And this is the part that will curdle your soul, the part that shows you the true shape of his evil. He knelt down beside my bed, not with malice in his eyes, not at first. He knelt like a holy man. He took my hand, his own so large and calloused it swallowed mine whole, and he began to pray. His voice was a low whisper, the same pious tone he used in the church. He asked God to forgive my youthful temptations. He asked for the Lord to cleanse my spirit of any impure thoughts. He was praying for my soul, you see. He was building a holy justification around the sin he was about to commit. It was his ritual, a baptism of fear before the drowning. When the prayer was over, he rose, and the man of God was gone. The shepherd was gone. Only the owner remained. I won't taint your ears with the mechanics of it. There are some horrors that words can only cheapen. But I'll tell you this. I learned in that moment how to leave my own body. I floated up to the ceiling, a silent witness, watching the scene unfold below with a strange, numb detachment. I counted the cracks in the plaster. I watched a spider spin its web in the corner. I did anything to not be in the bed where that little girl, who was me, was being broken. When it was over, he stood up, adjusted his clothes, and whispered, "God bless you, child," before walking out of the room as quietly as he'd entered. The only proof he had ever been there was the lingering scent of tobacco and the gaping, silent scream trapped in my throat. This became our new covenant, his and mine, a routine of prayer and violation. And in the daylight, we were father and daughter. In the dark, we were something else, something for which there is no name. Hester knew. She never asked. She never had to. We spoke in a language of shared glances over the washtub, of a quick, reassuring squeeze of the hand when he wasn't looking. She taught me how to disappear inside myself. She taught me how to build a wall inside my mind, a place he couldn't touch. But sometimes the wall would crack, and Miriam, my sweet, innocent Miriam, she would see the cracks. She'd see me crying silently while churning butter, and she'd put her little hand on my arm and ask, "Dorothea, what hurts?" And I'd have to swallow the truth like a shard of glass and tell her I was just tired. Then my body betrayed me. It began to hold a secret of its own. I missed my time, and then again. A familiar dread, cold and sickening, bloomed in my stomach. The same sickness that had taken Hester began in me. But when my mother finally looked at me with her weary, knowing eyes and confirmed it, we discovered a new terror. It wasn't one, it was two. Twins. Two tiny heartbeats thumping a rhythm of absolute doom right under my own. Hester had carried one secret, a burden heavy enough to crush her spirit. But I was carrying two. I didn't know it then, lying in my bed with my hand on my still flat stomach. But that discovery, that double terror. It wasn't just my story anymore. It was the moment that would seal the fate of my little sister, Miriam. Carrying two lives inside you that were born of something so wrong. It does a strange thing to your mind. My body was no longer my own. It was a vessel, a walking, breathing tomb for a secret that was getting bigger every day. The morning sickness was a constant, wretched reminder. I'd be out feeding the chickens, and a wave of it would hit me so hard I'd have to brace myself against the coop, praying no one would see. My father's eyes were always on me. He watched my body with a farmer's vigilance, not with concern, but with a grim sort of satisfaction, as if my suffering was a penance he himself had ordained. The tension in our house stretched so taut you could have plucked it like a banjo string and it would have screamed. Every meal was a trial. I'd force down bites of cornbread and greens, feeling his gaze, feeling the judgment of my mother's averted eyes, feeling the weight of the lie we were all living. My only solace was in the silent language I shared with Hester. There were no words for the horror, so we spoke in actions. When my back ached so bad I could barely stand, I'd find a hot compress left on my bed, still steaming. When I was too sick to eat, she'd slip me a piece of dried fruit from her own small stash later, when he wasn't looking. She'd take the heavier water buckets, her thin arms straining, just to spare me the effort. It was a desperate, quiet choreography of survival. She was trying to protect me, to give me the sliver of comfort she never had. But in her eyes, I saw the reflection of her own past, a haunted, hollow look that told me she knew this path ended in heartbreak. We were two ghosts, tending to a third, trying to shield the last flickering candle in the house. Our little sister, Miriam. Miriam was all sunlight and questions. She hadn't been tainted yet. Her world was still one of chasing fireflies and making up stories about the shapes of clouds. And her innocence, it was the most dangerous thing in that house. She'd come and lay her head on my lap, which was getting softer by the day, and look up at me with her big, curious eyes. "Dorothea, are you getting fat?" she'd ask, her voice pure as spring water. I'd feel a cold sweat on my neck. "I'm just eatin' well, honey," I'd lie, my voice strained. My internal world was a war. There was this fierce primal need to protect the lives inside me. They were innocent after all, blameless in their own creation. And then there was this wave of revulsion that would wash over me, because they were his. They were the living proof of his sin. I was caught between a monstrous motherhood and the memory of being a daughter, and the strain of it was pulling me apart at the seams. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was raining, one of those slow, steady drizzles that turns the whole world gray. Miriam was sitting on the floor by the hearth, quiet for once, drawing on a piece of brown wrapping paper with a nub of charcoal she'd found. She was humming a little tune to herself. It was a peaceful scene, a fragile little bubble of normalcy. After a while she got up, her face beaming with pride, and held the drawing up for me to see. My heart stopped. It was a child's drawing, all wobbly lines and strange proportions. But what it showed, it was us. There was a tall, looming figure of our father. Next to him, a smaller figure of our mother with a gaping open mouth that had no sound coming out. And then there were the three of us girls in a line: Hester, me, Miriam. And from my belly and from Hester's, Miriam had drawn dark, tangled scribbles like angry knots of thread. She didn't know what she was drawing. She was just drawing the feeling of the house. She was drawing the sadness she couldn't name. She was so proud. "Look, sissy, it's our family," she said, and trotted right over to my father, who had just come in, shaking the rain from his coat. She held the paper up to him. I wanted to scream, to snatch it away, to burn it before he could see, but I was frozen. He took the drawing from her small hand. He looked at it, and the air in the room dropped 20 degrees. He didn't get angry. He didn't yell. That would have been a mercy. Instead, a terrifying calm settled over his face. His eyes scanned the childish lines, and I knew he wasn't seeing a drawing. He was seeing a threat, a crack in his fortress of silence. He saw that the poison was leaking out, that the one pure thing in the house was beginning to be stained by the truth. He looked up from the paper, his gaze landing on me, and it was like being pierced by a shard of ice. He slowly, deliberately, crumpled the drawing into a tight ball in his fist. "Go to your room, Miriam," he said, his voice dangerously soft. She looked confused, her lip trembling, but she obeyed. The second the door clicked shut behind her, he turned his full attention to me. He took a step closer, the crumpled paper still clutched in his hand. "This sickness you carry," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper, "it is a weed, and it is spreading to the clean parts of the garden." He stood over me, his shadow swallowing me whole, my own growing belly a testament to his words. "A weed," he repeated, his eyes boring into mine, "must be pulled up by the root. It must be cut out, before it chokes everything good that is left." I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he wasn't just talking about the babies anymore. He was talking about the last bit of light in our world. He was talking about Miriam. His words, "It must be cut out," echoed in my head for weeks. I walked through my days in a fog of terror, my hand instinctively resting on my belly, as if I could physically shield the lives inside me from his looming pronouncement. Every sharp glare from him felt like a blade. Every time he looked at me and then at Miriam, I felt my blood turn to ice. I was a walking, ticking bomb, and the fuse was getting shorter with every sunrise. The house was suffocating. The air was thick with what was unspoken, what was feared. Hester's silence was a comfort, a shared blanket of dread. My mother's prayers became more frantic, a constant, useless hum that did nothing to keep the devil at bay. I knew the harvest of his sin was come due, and I prayed it wouldn't take all of us down with it. It happened on a night when a storm was raging outside, the heavens weeping and throwing thunder against our little farmhouse as if God himself was in a fury. It was a fitting soundtrack. The first pain hit me like a lightning strike, sharp and unforgiving. I cried out before I could stop myself. It was starting. There was no more hiding, no more time. Panic, cold and absolute, seized the house. My mother started weeping, wringing her hands and calling on a God who had long since abandoned our address. But something in Hester changed that night. The broken, hollowed-out girl was gone, and in her place was a soldier. Her face was grim, her jaw set. She took charge. "Get the water boiling. Get the clean rags," she ordered our mother, her voice steady and hard. Then she looked at me, her eyes meeting mine with a fierce understanding. "You ain't gonna die tonight, Dorothea," she whispered, her hand gripping mine. "I won't let him take you." She shoved a heavy wooden dresser in front of our bedroom door, a futile but powerful gesture. She wasn't just blocking the door, she was blocking him. For a few precious hours, this room would be ours. The pain was a red sea, drowning me. I'd rise to the surface for a breath, see Hester's determined face, hear my mother's choked sobs, and then be pulled back under. I screamed. I couldn't help it. I screamed until my throat was raw. And in the middle of this chaos, the door creaked open. It was Miriam. She'd been woken by the storm, both inside and out. She stood there in her little white nightgown, her eyes wide, a tiny ghost in the lamplight. My first feeling was shame, a hot, searing shame that she was seeing this, that her innocence was being ripped away by the raw, bloody truth of it. My mother tried to shoo her out, but Miriam wouldn't budge. And this is the part that haunts me most. She wasn't scared. Her face wasn't filled with horror. It was wrapped with a child's intense, unwavering curiosity. She was watching me, her sister, in the throes of this primal, terrifying act, and she was mesmerized. In her eyes, I wasn't a victim. I was some kind of powerful, screaming creator. She was watching a miracle, not knowing it was born from a curse. With one final, soul-tearing cry, the first baby came into the world. A girl. Hester, her hands trembling but sure, cleaned her and wrapped her in a rag. And as I lay there, gasping, thinking it was over, another wave of agony ripped through me. "There's another one," Hester breathed, her voice a mix of awe and terror. Minutes later, a boy. 2 babies, 2 perfect, tiny, screaming children, their cries joining the sound of the rain. For a moment, just a single, holy moment, there was nothing in the room but the exhaustion and the overwhelming, forbidden love that flooded my heart as I looked at their faces. Then, the dresser scraped against the floor. The door was pushed open, and he stood there, his shadow devouring the room. The storm outside had quieted, but the one inside had just arrived. He looked at me, lying in the blood-soaked sheets. He looked at the 2 infants in Hester's arms. His face was a mask of cold iron. He walked over, his boots silent on the floorboards, and peered down at the babies. No joy, no anger, just a chilling, blank assessment. He had his harvest. Then he looked at all of us, his 3 women and his 2 new children. He pronounced his judgment, his voice calm and absolute. "They will be raised in this house," he declared. "Hester's was an abomination, a secret to be buried. But these are a lesson. They will not be known as your issue. They are a gift from God in my old age. The world will know them as Anne and Abel Bell, your new brother, your new sister." He looked directly at me, my body still trembling, my heart still raw with a mother's first love. "And you, Dorothea," he said, sealing my fate, "you will be their sister. Nothing more." He didn't just steal my childhood. In that moment, he reached into my chest and stole my motherhood right after it was born. Bringing those babies into the world changed everything. And now, Now I was a ghost in my own life, a mother who was forbidden to be a mother, a sister to my own children. The real prison wasn't the four walls of that house. It was the role he had just forced me to play. Don't let this pain be forgotten. Subscribe. The days after my babies were born were a special kind of torture, the kind designed by a devil with a patient hand. The house was filled with the sounds of new life, the little snuffling noises, the sudden, sharp cries, and every single sound was a hook in my heart, pulling me toward them, but I wasn't allowed to answer. My own mother, transformed by the lie into a grim warden, would tend to them. I would stand in the doorway, my arms aching with emptiness, my breasts sore and leaking milk for children I wasn't allowed to claim, and I'd have to watch her soothe them. "You're a wonderful sister, Dorothea," my father would say, his voice smooth as butter as I handed him a fresh diaper. "Anne and Abel are so lucky to have you and Hester and Miriam to help." The words were a brand, searing the lie into my skin over and over again. I learned to be an actress. I played the part of the dutiful daughter, the helpful older sister, while inside, a mother screamed in silence. The performance wasn't just for inside the house. A week after the birth, my father stood in his pulpit and gave the sermon of his life. He told the story of his loyal, barren wife who had prayed for years, and how God, in his infinite wisdom, had granted them a miracle in their twilight years. A new Sarah, a new Abraham. He held up his hands, his face a perfect picture of humble gratitude, and the congregation wept with him. They ate it up like gospel. The miracle on Main Street, they called it. The Blessed Reverend Bell and his miracle twins. We girls sat in the front pew, props in his holy play. I could feel the eyes of the town on us. They weren't all looks of awe. There were whispers in the general store, speculative glances over picket fences. Women my mother's age would look at her impossibly smooth belly, and then at me and Hester, our own youthful bodies now objects of a strange, unspoken suspicion. But no one dared question the Reverend. His story was stronger than their doubt. Life settled into a grotesque routine. I was a mother in secret, a sister in public. I learned the particular cry of my son, Abel, versus the cry of my daughter, Anne. I learned to rock their cradles with my foot while pretending to shell peas. I would steal moments, a quick secret kiss on a downy head when no one was looking, a whispered promise that I would always be there. My love for them was a dangerous, contraband thing, a fire I had to keep banked low so the smoke wouldn't give me away. Hester, meanwhile, was fading. She moved through the house like a wisp of smoke herself, her eyes fixed on something far away. She wouldn't touch the babies. She wouldn't even look at them. And Miriam was entranced. She treated them like the most fascinating dolls she'd ever owned, hovering over their cradles, her face lit with a strange, intense light that worried me deep in my bones. The truth of Hester's silence came out on a Tuesday. Anne had a fever, her little body hot and her cries weak. My reaction was instant, primal. I picked her up, shushing her, my fear making me forget my role. My mother ripped the baby from my arms. "She is not yours to fret over," she hissed, her face a mask of panicked fury. "You will ruin everything with this feeling. Do you think you're the only one who has suffered?" I stared at her, confused. Her composure, always so rigid, had cracked. Tears streamed down her face. "You were lucky," she choked out, the words tumbling out like poison. "God gave you 2 healthy ones. He took Hester's. He took it back before it could even draw breath. A mercy, I suppose. She was spared your burden." The world tilted. I looked at my mother's tear-streaked face, and then I looked toward the porch where Hester was sitting, staring out at nothing. It all crashed down on me. Hester hadn't just been my guardian angel that night. She had been fighting her own war. While my body was tearing itself apart to bring 2 lives into the world, hers had been quietly, secretly losing one. Her stoicism, her distance from the babies, her retreat into silence. It wasn't a rejection. It was a tomb of grief for a child no one would ever acknowledge, a ghost that would haunt her forever. Her second birth wasn't a birth at all. It was a death. I thought I had been cast into the deepest pit of hell, forced to live a lie, to deny my own children. But that afternoon, I realized there were levels of suffering I couldn't even imagine. Hester was living in one, buried alive with her unmourned child. And as I turned my gaze from my silent sister to my youngest one, watching Miriam hum to the babies with that bright, obsessive look in her eyes, a cold dread washed over me. I had a terrible feeling that another pit was being dug just for her. I had no idea of the true cost of those two little lives, of the price we had all yet to pay. Knowing about Hester's lost child changed the way I saw everything. The very air in the house seemed to hold her grief, thick and heavy, like dust motes in a sunbeam. My own secret motherhood was a sharp, constant ache, but Hester's sorrow was a silent, creeping fog that was slowly claiming her. Her humming was the first sign that she was drifting away from shore. It was a single, tuneless melody that she would hum from sunup to sundown, a sound that had no joy in it, just a hollow, repetitive motion of breath. It was the sound of a soul rocking itself in a dark room. Then she started setting a place at the dinner table, a fourth plate on the other side of her. She'd place a fork and a spoon beside it, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were tending to a ghost only she could see. My father, the Reverend, he tried to ignore it at first. He'd preach at the dinner table about the virtues of a sound mind, his words aimed at her like stones. But Hester didn't hear him. She was already somewhere else. The breaking point for him was when she started carrying a bundle of old rags, swaddled up like an infant. She'd rock it in her arms, humming her ghost lullaby. It was too much for his perfectly ordered world. A daughter lost in her grief was one thing. A daughter displaying her madness for all to see was a threat to his reputation, a crack in the holy facade he had built. He started punishing her, calling it a cleansing of the spirit. He'd lock her in her room for hours with nothing but the Bible, commanding her to pray the madness away. I'd sneak her food and water when he wasn't looking, my heart breaking as I'd see her through the keyhole, sitting on the floor, rocking her bundle of rags, completely lost. I was fighting a war on two fronts. By day, I was the devoted sister to my own children, my love for them a secret garden I tended in my heart. By night, I was a secret keeper for my other sister, a witness to her slow erasure. All the while, I was trying to build a wall around Miriam, to protect her from the poison that was seeping into everything. But I was just one girl, and the cracks were starting to show everywhere. The complication that brought it all crashing down came, as it always did, from an unexpected place. It happened during supper. The house was quiet. The twins were finally sleeping. My father was holding forth about some passage from the book of Job, about suffering and faith. Hester was quiet, staring at the empty plate she'd set. Then my little Anne let out a sharp cry from the other room. It wasn't a loud cry, but it pierced the silence of the dining room, and it pierced the fog around Hester. Her humming stopped. Her head snapped up. For the first time in months, her eyes were clear, focused, and filled with a terrible, lucid pain. But she didn't look at our father. She didn't look at me. She turned her head and looked directly at Miriam, who was innocently pushing a pea around her plate, and Hester spoke. Her voice was raspy from disuse, a dry, rustling sound. "Don't you let him," she whispered, her words sharp as broken glass. "Don't you let him make your body a garden for his seeds." Miriam looked up, her eyes wide. Hester leaned forward, her gaze intense, pinning our little sister in place. "It's a bitter harvest, little bird," she rasped. "A bitter, bitter harvest. The truth. A piece of it, anyway. Spoken aloud, in front of Miriam. My father froze, a piece of bread halfway to his mouth. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. I felt the blood drain from my face. This was it. The secret was out. But the revelation wasn't the words themselves. It was the look on Miriam's face. She wasn't scared. She didn't recoil. A flicker of something I had seen before, that same rapt fascination from the night of the birth, danced in her eyes. Hester's words weren't a warning to her. They were a riddle, a piece of forbidden knowledge about the mysterious connection between our father, a garden, and the babies that had magically appeared. It was a key, and I could see her mind turning it in a lock I never wanted her to find. My father's reaction was swift and cold as a winter morning. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "She is unwell," he said, his voice void of all emotion. "Her mind is sick. She is a danger to the spiritual innocence of this family." He didn't look at Hester again. He looked at my mother. "I will make the arrangements tomorrow. She will be sent to a place where her madness can be treated." We all knew what that meant. The state asylum. A place people were sent to be forgotten. He wasn't sending her for treatment. He was burying the evidence. He had buried her child in the dark earth of the swamp, and now he was going to bury her in the sterile, white-walled tomb of a madhouse. Hester was gone, lost, and I was now utterly alone, the last buffer between the monster and the lamb. I watched as Miriam's gaze shifted from Hester's empty chair to our father's righteous face, and I saw a new terrifying question begin to form in her young eyes. The day they came for Hester, the sun was shining with a cruel, indifferent brightness. A black car, quiet as a hearse, rolled up our dusty drive, and two men in white coats helped my sister into the back seat. She didn't fight. She didn't even look back. She just climbed in, her bundle of rags held tight to her chest, and was gone. The car rolled away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a silence in the house so total it felt like the world had lost its sound. Her humming was gone. The empty place at the table was no longer a choice. It was a fact. I was 17, a mother to two infants I couldn't claim, and the last remaining soldier in a war I was losing. The buffer between the world my father had created and my little sister Miriam was now just me, and I felt as thin and fragile as a pane of glass. Hester's whispered warning did not frighten Miriam. It planted a seed. But the soil of her mind had been tilled and fertilized by our father for years, and what grew was not a flower of caution, but a thorny, twisted vine of curiosity. She started watching him, not with the fear of a child, but with the studious gaze of an acolyte. She'd sit quietly in a corner while he prepared his sermons, her eyes following his every move. She started asking questions that made my skin crawl. "Sissy," she asked me one evening while we were folding laundry, "is it a sin to be a garden?" I froze. "What are you talking about, honey?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Daddy says God chooses the most special gardens to plant his most important seeds," she said, her eyes wide and serious. "He says it's a blessing to be chosen, a painful blessing, but a blessing." He was poisoning her, twisting her innocence into a shape that would welcome the very horror Hester had tried to warn her against. I tried to fight it. I tried to pull her back into the world of childhood. I suggested we make dolls out of corn husks, that we go hunting for tadpoles in the creek, that we read her favorite fairy tales. For a little while she would relent, the light of a normal 12-year-old girl returning to her eyes, but I was no match for him. He saw what I was doing, and he began to systematically cut me off from her. He gave Miriam special duties. She was now responsible for helping him in his study, for keeping his books dusted and his pens filled. He called it her spiritual tutelage. I knew what it was. It was indoctrination. He was isolating his next victim, grooming her in plain sight, and I was utterly powerless to stop it. The risk was no longer a distant threat. It was a daily battle for my sister's soul, and I was losing ground with every sunset. The secret that laid it all bare, the root of all our pain, I found it by accident. My father, as a punishment for me being sullen, commanded me to give his study a thorough cleaning. It was a dark, intimidating room, smelling of old paper, leather, and him. I was dusting a high shelf of his oldest theological books when my hand brushed against a Bible that felt wrong. It was lighter than it should have been. On impulse, I took it down. It was hollowed out inside, and nestled in the cavity where the holy words should have been was a small, black leather journal, its pages brittle with age. It was his mother's, my grandmother's. My hands trembled as I opened it. Her handwriting was a cramped, angry script, and the words were a blueprint for the monster he had become. She wrote of the curse of the Bell women, a taint in the blood that made them susceptible to the sins of the flesh. She wrote about her own son, Elijah, my father. She believed he was born with this taint, and that it was her sacred duty to beat it out of him. I read about his childhood, about punishments that were pure torture, disguised as piety. She wrote of purification rituals where she would scrub his skin raw with lye soap, of fasts that lasted for days, of locking him in the dark cellar to wrestle with the devil that lived inside him. He wasn't just raised in a strict household. He was forged in pain, taught that love and cruelty were the same thing, that the body was a filthy vessel that had to be broken to be made clean. It didn't excuse the man he became. It explained him. It made him infinitely more terrifying. This wasn't just one man's evil. It was an inheritance, a legacy of pain, passed down from mother to son, and now from father to daughters. My head was swimming, the terrible words blurring on the page. I felt sick. The devil hadn't just appeared in our house one day. He had been carefully, lovingly crafted, piece by painful piece. I heard the floorboards creak in the hall, and I shoved the journal back into its hiding place just as the study door opened. My father stood there, his face unreadable. For a split second, illuminated by the dusty light from the window, I didn't see the Reverend. I saw a little boy with scrubbed raw skin, locked in a cellar. I saw the ghost of the monster that had created the monster in front of me. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by his usual cold authority. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice calm. My heart hammered in my chest. I had spent my life seeing him as my tormentor. Now I knew the horrifying truth. He was a link in a chain, and as I looked into his eyes, I knew he would never, ever let that chain be broken. He would never let Miriam escape becoming the next link. Carrying the knowledge of my father's past was like swallowing a stone. It sat heavy and cold in my gut, a constant, indigestible truth. I looked at the man who had ruined our lives and saw not just a monster, but a machine, a terrible engine of pain built by his own mother's hands. The cruelty he inflicted wasn't random. It was a ritual, a warped tradition being passed down through our bloodline. And Miriam was next in line. This knowledge didn't arm me, it paralyzed me. Hope is a fragile thing, and the idea that he could be changed, that he could be stopped, shriveled, and died. He wasn't just a sinner, he was a zealot, and we were his sacrifices. I watched him with Miriam, and it was like watching a snake hypnotize a bird. He was all gentleness and soft-spoken words with her now. He'd praise her for her piety, for her womanly understanding of Scripture. He was preparing her, anointing her for the altar. Miriam, on the cusp of 13, was blooming. Her body was changing, and he noticed every little shift. He told her it was a sign of God's favor, that her body was becoming a vessel fit for a holy purpose. He spoke of sacrifice, of how the greatest women in the Bible were the ones who gave everything of themselves for the will of God and the will of their fathers. It was a poison dart wrapped in a prayer, and she welcomed it. She'd look at him with such adoration, such pure, misplaced faith. She saw a prophet. I saw a monster sharpening his knife. The tension in the house grew with the summer heat, thick and suffocating. The date was set. For Miriam's 13th birthday, my father announced, there would be a special prayer service, just the family. A service to mark her official passage into womanhood in the eyes of the Lord. The words were so pious, so holy, but I knew their true meaning. It was a death sentence. It was the date of her execution. The dread was a physical presence. It sat with us at dinner. It followed me through my chores. At night, I would lie awake, listening to the ticking of the clock in the hall, each tick a countdown to the moment my sister's soul would be snuffed out. I felt a scream building in my chest for weeks, a scream of pure, helpless terror. I was going to have to stand by and watch the cycle complete itself, watch him destroy the last innocent thing in our lives. The night before her birthday, I reached my breaking point. I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't stand by. If I couldn't stop him, maybe, just maybe, I could wake her up. I waited until the house was deep in the silence of midnight. Then I crept from my room to hers. She was sleeping, her face so peaceful, so childish in the moonlight. I felt like a monster for what I was about to do, for the peace I was about to shatter. I gently shook her awake. She looked at me, her eyes clouded with sleep. "Sissy, what is it?" she whispered. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I took a deep breath, and I did the one thing I had never dared to do. I told her the truth. "Miriam," I whispered, my voice trembling, "you have to listen to me. What Daddy is planning for tomorrow. It's not a blessing. It's a lie." I told her everything. I told her about Hester, about her baby buried in the swamp. I told her about me. "Anne and Abel," I choked out, the words tasting like acid. "They're not our little brother and sister. They're my children, Miriam. They're my babies." I grabbed her hands, my grip desperate. "And Daddy is their father. He's the father of Hester's baby too. He hurts us. He calls it prayer, he calls it God's will, but it's a sin. He's going to hurt you tomorrow night, and he's going to tell you it's a holy thing, but it's not. It's evil." I searched her face for a flicker of understanding, of horror, of anything. What I saw broke me in a way his cruelty never had. Her expression shifted from confusion to a cold, pious anger. She snatched her hands away from mine as if I had burned her. "You're lying," she hissed, her voice full of a venom I had only ever heard from our father. "You're a liar, and you're jealous. You're jealous that Daddy chose me for a blessing. You're trying to steal it from me because your own soul is full of sin." She looked at me with pure disgust. The years of his careful work had been too effective. I wasn't her sister anymore. I was a blasphemer, a heretic standing in the way of her holy destiny. My desperate attempt to save her had backfired in the most catastrophic way imaginable. I hadn't just failed. I had made myself the enemy. She stood up on her bed, a tiny, righteous fury. "I'm telling Daddy," she declared, her voice ringing with certainty. "I'm going to tell him about the wicked, jealous lies you told me. I'm going to tell him in the morning so he can pray for your soul." I backed out of the room, my whole body shaking, the floor seeming to tilt beneath my feet. I had played my only card, and I had lost everything. I stood in the dark hallway, the sound of her condemnation echoing in my ears. I hadn't prevented the sacrifice. I had just strapped myself to the altar right next to her. In the morning, he would know what I had done, and there would be nowhere left for me to go. That night, sleep was a country I couldn't enter. I sat on my bed, fully dressed, and just waited. The darkness in my room was a living thing, breathing with me, counting the seconds with me. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind outside was the sound of my judgment arriving. I had thrown the truth like a stone, trying to shatter a window to let some light in for Miriam. Instead, I had brought the whole rotten roof crashing down on top of myself. When the first pale gray light of dawn crept into my room, it felt like an accusation. It was the morning of Miriam's 13th birthday, the morning of her sacrifice, and the morning of my reckoning. I didn't have to wait long. Miriam, with the righteous fury of a new convert, went to him as soon as she heard him stirring. A few minutes later, my mother appeared at my door, her face pale and pinched. "He wants to see you," she whispered, and wouldn't meet my eyes. The walk to his study felt a mile long. He was sitting behind his heavy oak desk, the big family Bible open before him. Miriam stood beside his chair, her arms crossed, her face a mask of pious certainty. She looked at me not as a sister, but as a demon to be exorcised. My father didn't raise his voice. That was the most terrifying part. His rage was a cold, quiet thing, a coiled snake. "She has told me," he began, his voice dangerously soft, "of the blasphemy you whispered in her ear last night. She has told me how you tried to poison her mind against God and against her own father." He leaned forward, his eyes pinning me in place. "You are a vessel of corruption, Dorothea, a bitter root. Your jealousy and your sin have made you an agent of the devil, sent to tempt the pure of heart." I said nothing. What was there to say? He wouldn't have heard the truth if I'd screamed it. My silence was my confession to him. My punishment was swift, and in his mind, just. It was not a beating. He was too clever for that. It was a kind of erasure. "You will be purified by the sweat of your brow and the ache of your bones," he decreed. I was banished from the house during daylight hours. I was to do the hardest work of the farm, the work reserved for hired men we could never afford. Mending fences, turning the soil in the hardpan field, mucking out the chicken coop and the pigsty. I was to be cut off from Miriam, and most cruelly, from Anne and Abel. I would see my own children from a distance, a ghost haunting the edges of her own life. My difficult decision was simply to breathe, to endure, to put one foot in front of the other and survive the penance he had laid upon me. That day was the longest of my life. I worked under the hot sun until my back screamed and my hands were raw and blistering. Every muscle ached. But it was nothing compared to the pain in my soul as I watched him lead Miriam, dressed in a clean white dress, into the parlor for her birthday prayer. The sun began to set, painting the sky in bloody streaks of orange and red. I was finishing my work in the barn when I heard it. A scream, not of pain, but of pure animal panic. It was my mother's voice. I dropped the shovel and ran, my heart hammering against my ribs. I burst through the back door into a scene from a nightmare. My mother was on her knees, shrieking. My father was standing by the parlor door, his face ashen, his usual iron control completely gone. He looked stunned, lost. And on the floor, on the good rug, was Miriam. Her white dress was stained, soaked with a horrifying, impossible amount of blood. Her face was chalky white, her eyes closed, her breathing a shallow, rattling whisper. She looked like a broken doll, so small, so fragile. The blessing she had so eagerly awaited, the holy purpose her body was meant for, it had shattered her. Her little girl's body, not yet ready for womanhood, had been so violently traumatized that it was breaking apart from the inside. The hemorrhage was catastrophic. He had called her a garden, a vessel, but she was just a child, and the price of his blessing was her life. He had prayed for a miracle, and the devil had answered with blood. I looked at my father's horrified face, then at my dying sister on the floor, and I knew with chilling certainty that his judgment day had finally arrived. The night of sacrifice wasn't over. It had just begun. For a long moment, the world was just the sound of my mother's screams and the sight of my sister's blood seeping into the floorboards. My father, the great reverend, the pillar of faith and rock of this family, was frozen. His face was a mask of pure, uncomprehending horror. The consequence of his sin was lying at his feet, and for the first time in his life, he had no scripture, no twisted justification to shield him from the sight. The shepherd was watching his lamb bleed out, and he was paralyzed. But something in me, something that had been beaten down and buried for years, broke through the surface. The fear was gone, burned away by a white-hot rage. The girl who had been mucking out the pigsty that afternoon was gone. A mother, a protector, took her place. "Get sheets, now!" I roared, my voice a sound I didn't recognize. I lunged toward the linen closet, grabbing anything I could find. My mother was still on her knees, lost in her hysteria. I grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her, hard. "Mama, get water, boil it, we need to clean the wound." My command shocked her out of her panic for a second. She scrambled to her feet and ran to the kitchen, a puppet whose strings had just been pulled by a new master. I turned to my father. He was muttering, his eyes wide with panic. "We must pray," he stammered. "God will heal her. A doctor cannot know of this." That was it. The final thread of my submission snapped. I stood up, my hands stained with my sister's blood, and I walked toward him. "Pray!" I screamed, the sound ripping from my throat. "You will not pray over her. You are the one who did this. Your blessing, your holy purpose. You killed her." I was screaming all the things I had swallowed for years. The truth a torrent of poison I was finally spitting back at him. "You are not a man of God. You are a monster. You broke Hester. You buried her baby. You turned me into a whore in my own home. And now you have killed Miriam." My mother, hearing the blasphemy, froze in the kitchen doorway, a pot of water in her hands. She looked from my furious face to her husband's terrified one, to her dying daughter on the floor. And something inside her, the last dormant ember of a mother's love, finally ignited. The plot twist of that night wasn't my rebellion. It was hers, After a lifetime of silence, of prayer as a shield for her denial, my mother finally acted. She let the pot clatter to the floor. Her face, usually so passive and weary, contorted into a mask of pure rage. She let out a guttural cry and lunged for the heavy, leather-bound family Bible on its stand by the fireplace, the very book he used as his weapon and his shield. She lifted it high over her head, her thin arms trembling with the effort and the fury, and she brought it down on his head. "No more!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You will not take another one! You will not kill another one of my girls!" He stumbled back, shock and pain on his face, a trickle of his own blood now running down his temple. He looked at her as if he'd never seen her before. She raised the book to strike again, but her strength was gone. She collapsed onto the floor, a heap of calico and sobs, her one great act of defiance leaving her utterly spent. He stared at the scene, at his bleeding head, his hysterical wife, his furious daughter, and his dying child. His reign was over. His kingdom had crumbled into blood and chaos in a matter of minutes. He backed away, turned, and fled up the stairs, seeking refuge in the room where he had once been the absolute king. The battle was over, and we had lost. I scrambled back to Miriam's side. Her breathing was so shallow now, a tiny flutter. I lifted her head into my lap, stroking her hair, whispering that I was there, that I loved her. The blood was still flowing, and I knew there was nothing I could do to stop it. She was too small, too broken. Her eyes flickered open one last time, and she looked at me. A flicker of the old Miriam, my sweet little sister, in their depths. Then a tiny sigh escaped her lips, like the last bit of air leaving a balloon, and she was still, utterly, terribly still. The storm was over. My father was broken. My mother had found her voice, only to lose it again to grief. But it was too late. I sat there on the floor, in the ruins of my family, holding my little sister's lifeless body in my arms, the weight of her more than I could bear. I thought that was the end. I thought we had finally hit the bottom, that there was nothing left to lose, no deeper circle of hell to descend into. I thought all the secrets had been bled out onto the floor. But in the awful, ringing quiet that followed, I would soon learn that our story had one last, terrible surprise waiting in the shadows. In the end, there was no storm, no final clash. There was only a deafening, hollow quiet. Miriam's body lay on the floor, a testament to a prayer that had been answered by the devil. My father, his face bloodied by the Bible my mother had wielded, was a broken man. His authority, his righteous fury had vanished, leaving only a pathetic, terrified shell. My mother was a crumpled heap, her one act of rebellion having drained the life from her. In that moment, I was the only one left standing, a girl of 17 holding the entire, crushing weight of my family's ruin. We couldn't call the doctor. We couldn't call the undertaker. The truth of what happened in that house had to be buried along with my sister. That night, under a sliver of moon, my father and I dug a grave behind the old shed. He, who had once thundered about heaven and hell from the pulpit, couldn't even look at me as we laid her small body in the cold earth. We buried her without a prayer, because we all knew God had left that place long ago. The years that followed were lived in that quiet. My mother never truly came back from that night. She faded, retreating into a world of whispers and shadows, and died 2 years later from what the town doctor called a weak heart. I knew she died of a broken one. My father lived on for decades, a ghost haunting his own house. He still preached on Sundays, but the thunder was gone, replaced by a dry, raspy voice that held no conviction. He died in his sleep when he was 79, and the town mourned him as a saint, a man of God who had tragically lost his wife and youngest daughter too soon. I went to his funeral. I stood there, dry-eyed, and listened to them praise his name. And when they lowered his casket into the ground, I spit on the dirt. A small, silent act of defiance for the girl he had buried all those years ago. As for Hester, a cold, clinical letter from the asylum arrived one day. It said she had taken her own life, hanged herself in her room with a rope made from her own bedsheets. She had hung her Bible on the same hook. She had been a prisoner to the very end. And me? I stayed. I stayed in that house of ghosts, and I raised my children, Anne and Abel. I raised them as my brother and sister, a lie that was both my penance and my salvation. I poured every ounce of maternal love I had into them, disguising it as sisterly affection. I protected them with a fierceness I didn't know I possessed, ensuring the shadows of that house never touched them. They grew up, and they left, as they should have. They have families of their own now, in faraway cities, and they have no idea of the poisoned soil from which they sprung. They just know me as their eccentric older sister, Dorothea, who never left home. For years, I let the secrets lie. But now, at 84, with the end of my own road in sight, I knew I couldn't leave them buried. A few months ago, I finally found the strength to clean out my father's study. I found the hollowed-out Bible where he'd kept his mother's journal. I ran my fingers along the inside and felt something else. A false bottom. Tucked beneath it was a folded, yellowed photograph and a letter. The photo was of a young woman I didn't recognize, her face sad but familiar, holding a baby. The letter was in my father's hand, written late in his life, a confession he never meant for anyone to see. He wrote that the woman in the photo was his own sister, Charity. He wrote that his mother, in her fanaticism, believed the only way to cleanse the curse of the flesh from their bloodline was through a holy, purifying union. She had forced him and his sister into the same sin that he would later inflict upon us. The baby in the photo was his first child, his first daughter, born of his own sister, sent away to be raised in secret. The cycle didn't start with my grandmother's abuse. It started with an act that mirrored my own story, a generation before. He wasn't just repeating a pattern of violence. He was repeating a specific, horrifying sin that had been his first inheritance. Holding that letter, the final, ugliest piece of the puzzle, I didn't feel rage. That had burned out long ago. I felt a profound, bottomless wave of sorrow. The evil had been a legacy, a curse passed down in silence. My father, my mother, Hester, Miriam, we were all its victims. And the silence was what gave it its power. Right then, I made my choice. I would not die in silence. I would not let our stories be buried with me. What I am telling you now, this is me breaking the chain. This is me taking the inheritance of silence and turning it into a testament. This is how I learned that truth, no matter how painful, is the only thing that can set you free. It's how I learned that the deepest wounds are the ones kept in the dark, and that speaking them aloud is the first step toward healing. If my story moved you, don't just carry it as a sadness. Let it be a reminder. Speak up for those who can't. Listen to the stories that are hard to hear. Break the silence in your own life, in your own family, in your own town. Because every voice that speaks the truth weakens the power of the monsters who thrive in the quiet. I'm still here, in this old house, and I want to know what you think. And tell me, what city are you watching this from? I'd love to know where my words are reaching.